In this video, we're going to introduce the first few types of biomolecules that you need to know. There are 4 major classes of biomolecules that we're going to cover in this course. The first class is proteins. Proteins are long chains of amino acids. Carbohydrates is our second major class of biomolecules. They're polyhydroxylated, which means multiple OH groups, and they also will have an aldehyde or ketone. And you can see the common molecular formula shown here. Carbohydrates are also referred to as sugars or saccharides. We'll also be looking at nucleic acids, which are long chains of nucleotides, and we'll go over what nucleotides are. The last major class of biomolecules that we're going to cover is lipids. Lipids are this weird class that contains fats, waxes, and just kind of other organic compounds that aren't really soluble in water. We're not going to cover lipids in this chapter. We will talk about lipids more in a future chapter. First, we're going to start in on proteins. Proteins are built up of amino acids. An amino acid is shown here on the left. Amino acids are going to link together to form proteins. You have all sorts of different proteins in your body. The example that they've shown here is a protein that's used to make up muscle tissue. Peptides refer to shorter chains of amino acids, usually about 50 or less, and proteins refer to much longer chains of amino acids, usually greater than 50. Let's look a little bit closer at the amino acid. Here's a picture of a generic amino acid. Hopefully you can recognize that it has an amine functional group and a carboxylic acid functional group. All amino acids differ at this side chain. The side chain can be a variety of things. Sometimes it's as simple as a hydrogen. Sometimes it's a carbon chain. Sometimes it has all sorts of different other atoms. The alpha carbon is used to identify this carbon in the middle, right between the amine, the carboxylic acid, and the R group. If you look up structures of amino acids online, you may also see this version of the protonated amino acid. You may also see this version of a protonated amino acid. In this case, the carboxylic acid has lost a hydrogen and has a negative charge on the oxygen, and the amine has picked up a proton and has a positive charge. When we get to the chapter on acids and bases, we'll talk a little bit more about why you might see this form. Amino acids form peptides and proteins, and they're linked together by amide bonds. In this example of a peptide, you can see the amine at one end, the carboxylic acid at the other, and they have reacted together to form amide bonds connecting all of the different amino acids. In this particular example, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 amino acids that came together to form this short peptide. The carbonyl group here came from a carboxylic acid, and the nitrogen here came from an amine, and the new bond that was formed is right there. There are several different types of amino acids. You do not have to memorize amino acids. These are here for your reference. You can see that amino acids are usually referred to by name and also a 3-letter code. So I've listed all of the names and 3-letter codes here for you so you can refer back to it later if you need to. This first group of amino acids all have nonpolar side chains, which mean for the most part, they're all carbons and hydrogens. Glycine has a hydrogen. Here we have a methyl group. Here's carbons and hydrogens here. You can kind of see the pattern. All of these are carbons and hydrogens. Methionine is a little bit weird in that it does have this sulfur group, but generally it's going to be fairly nonpolar. You also have proline, which is pretty weird here because the carbon chain has wrapped all the way around and is actually connected to the amine. Amino acids with polar neutral side chains have functional groups like alcohols, as you can see here with the first 2. You also have an SH or a thiol. Down here we have a phenol, and in the case of tryptophan we have an amine, and the last 2 here have amides. So you can see that they're quite different from the nonpolar side chains, which really had mostly carbon and hydrogen bonds. Amino acids with polar acidic side chains contain the carboxylic acid functional group. So that should be your hint. Acidic side chain, carboxylic acid. Amino acids with polar basic side chains have amine functional groups. As we'll learn soon, amines are basic, and so that's where that terminology is coming from. Notice that amino acids containing Amides are considered to be polar neutral rather than polar basic. Also, tryptophan is a weird one. Even though it has an amine, it's considered to be polar neutral, not polar basic. So those are a couple weird ones that you want to keep in mind. Next, we're going to talk about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are polyhydroxylated aldehydes and ketones. You can see an example here where you have an aldehyde that has all of these OH groups. And here's the aldehyde here. This molecule can cyclize to the cyclic form. Either form is referred to as a monosaccharide or a simple sugar. If they link together in chains, then we have a polysaccharide. Poly means many. Remember that carbohydrates can be called saccharides or sugars as well. This particular example of a polysaccharide is cellulose, which is used in plant cell walls. Just to give you a little bit more of an example of what saccharides look like, you can see a monosaccharide shown here on the left. Acyclic means that it is in its open chain form, and it can cyclize to form, in this case, a 5-membered ring. Monosaccharide in either the cyclic or acyclic form can be referred to as a simple carbohydrate or a simple sugar. And these are going to convert back and forth. We'll learn more about that in a future lecture. Complex carbohydrates involve more than one sugar. For example, a disaccharide is shown here. We have one sugar over here and one sugar over here. So the two sugars come together to form a disaccharide. An oligosaccharide is shown here because it has 1, 2, 3 sugars. Oligosaccharides occur whenever you have 3 to 10 monosaccharides. If you have more than 10, then we'll call that a polysaccharide. Lastly, we're going to talk about nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are made up of nucleotides. A nucleotide consists of a sugar, a phosphate group, and a basic portion. Nucleotides are connected together to form DNA and RNA, and you can see an example of the DNA double helix shown here. DNA, of course, is going to aggregate into larger chromosomes. This is a little bit more detail of what the nucleotide looks like. The phosphate group is this green portion here, and you can see that it's typically connected to a sugar of another nucleotide. The sugar group is shown down here in red. In RNA, it has an OH group here, and in DNA, you don't have that OH group. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, deoxy meaning no OH. We also have different examples of nitrogenous bases shown here. Here's one for RNA, and here's one for DNA. The nitrogenous bases, for the most part, are the same. You can see that G, A, and C, guanine, adenine, and cytosine, are nitrogenous bases that are used in both RNA and DNA. The only difference that you have is uracil over here, U, which is only found in RNA, and thymine, T, which is only found in DNA. This concludes biomolecules, and this is the end of Chapter 1.